Welcome to this channel. At the sum of 1,000 subscribers, I will post a series of special stories for you. Subscribe. Sava trudged through the thick, sticky mud of Veltrax, her bare feet sinking into the ground with every step. The rain poured down from the gloomy sky, mixing with the oily residue that covered much of her village, remnants of the human mining operations that had scarred her world. The once beautiful forests had been replaced by massive steel structures, the sounds of drills and machines echoing through the valleys. Her clothes, a simple patchwork of worn fabric, clung to her silver-blue skin, now streaked with mud. She kept her head low as she walked through the marketplace, avoiding the glances of the humans and wealthier Veltraxians who looked down on her with disdain. They didn't need to say anything, their eyes said it all: she didn't belong. It wasn't always this way. Her planet had once thrived with vibrant ecosystems and vast cities, all sustained by Veltraxian technology and culture. But when the humans discovered Veltrax's rich mineral deposits, everything changed. In a matter of decades, the human corporations had taken control, turning her people into second-class citizens on their own planet. Sava's family had lost everything. Her father had once been a respected scholar, her mother an engineer. Now, they both worked in the mines, their bodies worn from years of labor, their spirits crushed by the weight of human oppression. Sava had tried to find work in the cities, but no one wanted to hire a girl from the slums. Every door had been slammed in her face. As she passed by a large holographic screen in the center of the marketplace, a commercial flickered to life. The face of Darius Vance, the CEO of Vance Industries, appeared on the screen. His voice, smooth and authoritative, filled the square. "Are you ready for the future?" he asked, his piercing blue eyes staring out at the crowd. "Vance Industries is launching the Galaxy Expansion Initiative, and we are searching for the brightest minds from across the universe. One lucky candidate from each planet will be chosen for our elite interstellar internship program. A chance to work alongside the most powerful minds in the galaxy, to change the future of your world and beyond." Sava paused, her heart racing. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to escape the mud and grime of Veltrax and do something meaningful. But could she, a poor alien girl with no formal education and no resources, possibly stand a chance against the thousands of others who would be competing? She shook her head and kept walking, but the thought lingered in her mind. She had nothing to lose. If she didn't try, she would be stuck here forever, just like her parents, trapped in the endless cycle of poverty and exploitation. When she returned to the small shack she called home, her parents were already seated around the makeshift table, their faces lined with exhaustion. The air inside was thick with the smell of dampness and earth. Her father, Elner, glanced up as she entered, his once bright eyes now dulled by years of hardship. "You're late," he said, though his voice held no anger, only weariness. "I stayed to watch the announcement," Sava replied, dropping her satchel by the door. "They're looking for candidates for the Galaxy Expansion Initiative. Someone from Veltrax could be chosen." Her mother, Tyra, let out a bitter laugh. "Someone from Veltrax, yes, but not one of us. The humans have already chosen who they want, those from the cities, the ones who can afford to dress like them and speak their language." Sava frowned. "Maybe. But I have to try. If I don't, I'll never know. This could be our chance, our way out." Her father sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "You're a dreamer, Sava. Always have been. But this world isn't kind to dreamers. The humans see us as nothing more than tools to extract resources. Why would they choose you?" Sava felt a familiar pang of frustration, but she didn't let it show. "Because I'll show them I'm different. I'll show them I'm worth more than they think." Tyra stood and walked over to Sava, placing a hand on her shoulder. "If you want to try, we won't stop you. Just don't get your hopes up too high. This world isn't fair." Sava nodded, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let the doubts of others or her own stop her. That night, While the wind howled outside and the rain beat down on the roof, she sat at the small table and filled out the crude application form. Her hands were covered in ink by the time she was done, and her writing looked childish compared to the polished presentations she imagined the other candidates would submit. But it didn't matter. She would stand in line with the rest of them, covered in mud and desperation, and make her case. The next morning, the sun barely peeked through the gray clouds as Sava made her way to the selection site. The building where the interviews were being held was a sleek, towering structure, its metallic surface reflecting the dark sky. Humans in immaculate suits stood at the entrance, checking credentials, while Veltraxians in fine clothing milled about nervously, clutching their application forms. Sava felt out of place the moment she arrived. The other candidates were well-dressed, their glowing silver skin free of the grime that covered hers. Some whispered as she passed, their eyes lingering on her muddy clothes and bare feet. She ignored them, her heart pounding in her chest as she approached the entrance. One of the human guards looked her up and down, clearly unimpressed. "Name?" "Sava," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. He checked his list, then gave a short nod. "Go inside. Take a seat and wait to be called." Sava stepped through the doors and into a grand hall lined with shining marble floors and glass walls. The other candidates sat in neat rows, reviewing their portfolios on sleek data pads. Sava took a seat at the back, her hands gripping the edges of her tattered application. She could feel the weight of their stares, their unspoken judgments, but she forced herself to stay calm. This was her one chance, and she wouldn't let anyone intimidate her. The hours dragged on, and one by one, the candidates were called in for their interviews. As she sat there, she couldn't help but overhear their conversations. They talked about their prestigious educations, their connections to powerful humans, and the wealth their families had accumulated. Sava felt a twinge of doubt. How could she compete with that? Finally, her name was called. She stood, her legs trembling slightly, and made her way to the interview room. Inside, a long table awaited her, with several humans seated behind it. In the center was Darius Vance himself, his sharp eyes fixed on her as she entered. Sava took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. "Why do you think you deserve this opportunity?" Darius asked, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Sava hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "I've had nothing my whole life. No wealth, no education, no connections. But I've survived. I've worked harder than anyone else just to make it through each day. If you give me this chance, I'll work harder than anyone else in this room. I'll prove to you that I'm worth it." Darius didn't respond immediately. His eyes, cold and calculating, studied her intently. Finally, he nodded, and without another word, gestured for her to leave. As Sava walked out of the room, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that the interview was over, but also uncertainty. Had she said enough? Had she convinced him? All she could do now was wait. The anticipation in the air was palpable. Thousands of candidates from across Veltrax had gathered in the grand hall of the selection center, their nerves as sharp as the metallic walls that loomed over them. Sava, sitting in the far corner of the massive space, tried to calm her racing heart, but it was impossible. The enormity of the moment weighed on her. Around her, candidates chatted excitedly, their polished clothes glinting in the soft blue light that filled the room. She didn't belong here, and she could feel it in every sideways glance and whispered comment that passed her by. She was covered in mud again. Despite washing herself in the small stream near her family's shack, the thick, clay-like soil of Veltrax seemed to cling to her skin and clothes. She had no fancy garments to wear, just her patched-together tunic and worn boots. Her silver-blue skin, unique to her kind, shone dimly beneath the layers of grime, and her long hair, once a brilliant shade of violet, was tied back in a frayed braid. The holographic displays above flashed with the image of a sleek, silver spacecraft as it descended toward the city. It was a state-of-the-art cruiser, nothing like the clunky old freighters that flew over the poor districts. This was the personal vessel of Darius Vance, the CEO of Vance Industries and the man who held the fate of every candidate in his hands. "He's here," someone near Sava whispered in awe. The excitement in the room grew. Sava watched as candidates straightened their outfits, brushed invisible dust from their clothes, and checked their reflections in the glass walls. Meanwhile, Sava sat there, covered in mud, clutching her handwritten application form. A deep, hollow pit formed in her stomach. What was she doing here? How could she possibly compete with these people? Just as doubt threatened to overwhelm her, the massive steel doors at the front of the hall slid open with a soft hiss. The room fell into a hush. A group of humans in sleek, tailored suits entered, flanked by robotic assistants that hovered beside them, their glowing eyes scanning the crowd. And then, at the center of it all, was Darius Vance. He was tall, with an air of authority that seemed to fill the room the moment he entered. His black, fitted suit shimmered with a high-tech sheen, and his short, dark hair was neatly styled. But it was his eyes that drew the most attention, sharp and piercing. They seemed to see through everything, as if he could measure a person's worth in a single glance. For a moment, Sava was caught off guard by how young he looked. Despite his position as the head of the most powerful interstellar corporation in the galaxy, Darius couldn't have been much older than 35. Yet, every movement he made was deliberate, controlled, like someone who had already lived a lifetime of power. He stood at the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, surveying the sea of hopeful faces. Sava could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken competition between all the candidates. Darius Vance was about to make a life-changing decision for one of them. One Veltraxian would be chosen to leave this planet behind and work with him on the Galaxy Expansion Initiative. The rest? They would return to the lives they'd always known. "Welcome," Darius said, his voice calm and authoritative, filling the room without him having to raise it. "You have been selected from thousands of applicants across this planet to compete for a single position within my company. The Galaxy Expansion Initiative is not just about business. It's about the future. Your future. And the future of countless others across the universe." Sava couldn't take her eyes off him. There was something captivating about the way he spoke, as if he wasn't just talking to the crowd, but directly to her. The others around her were nodding, murmuring their agreement, hanging on his every word. "This opportunity," Darius continued, "will change the life of one of you forever. It will be the gateway to worlds you can't even imagine, to knowledge, power, and influence that few ever achieve. But let me be clear, this position isn't for the faint of heart. I am looking for someone who embodies the qualities necessary to succeed in a galaxy filled with challenges. Only the best will be chosen." Sava's heart pounded. This was her chance. But how could she, a girl covered in mud and raised in the ruins of a once great planet, possibly prove she was the best? The selection process began immediately. Candidates were called up in small groups to present their qualifications. Sava sat quietly, watching as person after person stood in front of Darius and his panel of judges. Each time, they boasted of their academic achievements, their family connections, and their accomplishments within the human-controlled sectors. They spoke in perfect galactic standard, a language Sava could barely understand, let alone speak fluently. Her stomach churned as she saw the candidates present sleek digital portfolios, showcasing holographic projections of their inventions, leadership achievements, and planetary projects. Sava had nothing but the crumpled, handwritten form in her hands. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she realized how unprepared she looked. Eventually, her group was called. Sava stood slowly, her knees weak as she followed the others to the front of the room. The others in her group barely glanced at her, their attention focused on Darius and the other judges. They were polished, confident, speaking in the smooth tones of those who had been raised with privilege and education. Then it was her turn. She stepped forward, her muddy boots squelching softly on the pristine floor. Darius's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment she felt frozen. The weight of his gaze was suffocating. She could see him mentally calculating her, sizing her up as if deciding how much time she was worth. The other judges whispered to each other, clearly unimpressed by her appearance. "What's your name?" Darius asked, his tone even, though there was a hint of curiosity in his voice. "Sava," she managed to say, her voice small but steady. He raised an eyebrow. "And what do you have to offer Vance Industries, Sava?" Her mind raced. She had no glowing achievements to show, no digital portfolio filled with accolades. All she had was her life, her struggles, and the fire inside her that had kept her going all these years. She took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I don't have the education or the resources that the others here have," Sava said, her voice growing stronger. "I wasn't born into wealth or privilege. But I know how to survive. I've had to fight for everything I have, even if it's not much. I know what it means to struggle, to work hard, and to never give up. And I know how much this opportunity means to someone like me. If you choose me, I'll work harder than anyone else. I'll prove that I'm worth more than where I come from." For a long moment, there was silence. The other candidates shifted uncomfortably, clearly unimpressed by her speech. But Darius continued to watch her, his eyes narrowing slightly as if something in her words had caught his attention. He didn't speak. Instead, he glanced at one of his aides, who nodded and made a note on their tablet. "You may go," Darius said, his voice neutral. Sava's heart sank. She had no idea what he was thinking. Had she said enough? Was her honesty enough to make her stand out? She turned and walked back to her seat, her hands trembling. As the rest of the candidates finished their presentations, Sava couldn't stop replaying the moment in her head. She had laid everything out in front of Darius Vance, her life, her struggles, and now it was out of her hands. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The sun had already set on Veltrax by the time the selection process came to a close. The grand hall, once buzzing with excitement, now felt heavy with tension. The candidates, all 1,000 of them, sat in their seats, waiting for the announcement that would change one life forever. Sava's heart pounded in her chest as she sat toward the back, feeling smaller than she ever had before. Her presentation had been brief, almost too brief compared to the others. What chance did she really have? She glanced around the room. The other candidates whispered to one another, their voices filled with anticipation and hope. Some even laughed, confident they would be the ones to catch Darius Vance's attention. Others sat in quiet dignity, their pristine appearances giving them an aura of superiority. Sava felt the weight of her mud-caked clothes and the dirt still clinging to her skin. She couldn't stop thinking about the way Darius had looked at her during the interview, calm, calculating, impossible to read. The massive hollow screen at the front of the room flickered to life. Darius Vance stood at the center, once again commanding everyone's attention without saying a word. His figure was framed by the holographic insignia of Vance Industries, an emblem of power that seemed to glow behind him. Beside him stood a few of his robotic aides, their data tablets glowing faintly as they gathered the final notes and judgments from the days-long selection process. A hush fell over the hall as Darius stepped forward to speak. His voice, as smooth and composed as before, echoed through the room. "Thank you all for your participation today. You are here because you represent the brightest and most ambitious individuals this planet has to offer. The Galaxy Expansion Initiative is not just a business venture, it is the future of interstellar cooperation, the future of our universe. I commend each of you for your efforts and your determination." Sava felt a knot form in her stomach. She had heard enough of these kinds of speeches to know what was coming next. The polite thanks, the corporate pleasantries before the announcement of the single chosen candidate. She braced herself for the inevitable disappointment. Darius continued, his sharp blue eyes sweeping over the crowd. However, only one of you will be selected to represent Veltrax, to join me and my team as we chart a new course for the future." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The tension in the room was unbearable. Every candidate leaned forward slightly, holding their breath, waiting for the name that would decide their fate. Sava closed her eyes. She didn't want to hear someone else's name. She didn't want to feel the crushing weight of rejection. But she had to face it. Darius looked down at the data tablet in his hand, then back at the crowd. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "The chosen candidate is Sava from Veltrax." For a moment, there was nothing but stunned silence. Sava's eyes shot open. Had she heard that right? She blinked, frozen in place as if her mind couldn't process the words. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes suddenly turning toward her, but it didn't feel real. "Sava," Darius repeated, more firmly this time, as if to erase any doubt. "Step forward." Sava felt her legs tremble beneath her, her muscles refusing to cooperate. For a few seconds, she couldn't move. Her heart was racing, her mind swirling with disbelief. Out of all the candidates, out of all the polished, perfect people who had presented themselves today, he had chosen her. The poor alien girl covered in mud? Whispers broke out among the candidates, shocked and disbelieving. "Her," someone muttered. "How could he choose her?" "She didn't even have a real portfolio," another voice hissed. Sava forced herself to stand, her legs shaky as she made her way to the front of the hall, her pulse roared in her ears, her skin tingling with the realization that every single person in the room was staring at her. She felt the weight of their scorn, their disbelief, and their judgment pressing down on her, but she tried to push it aside. This was her moment. She had been chosen. Darius watched her approach with the same calm, unreadable expression as before. When she reached the front, he gave her a slight nod of acknowledgement. "Congratulations," he said. "You have earned this opportunity." Sava stood before him, her voice caught in her throat. What was she supposed to say? "Thank you." The words felt too small for the gravity of the moment. She tried to speak, but all she could do was nod back, overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of what had just happened. As the room continued to murmur in confusion, one of the candidates near the front, a young Veltraxian male in a sharp suit, stood up, his face flushed with anger. "With all due respect, Mr. Vance, why her?" he demanded. "She doesn't have any of the qualifications that the rest of us have. She didn't even present a proper portfolio. Some of us have been preparing for this for years." She dash. Darius cut him off with a single raised hand. The man fell silent immediately, his outrage turning into a nervous tension under the CEO's icy gaze. "I chose Sava because she understands something none of you do," Darius said, his voice calm but commanding. "You have all had advantages. You've had resources, education, connections. You've lived in comfort. But she knows what it means to struggle, to fight for survival. That perspective is what I need. Someone who won't take this opportunity for granted." Sava could hardly believe what she was hearing. Darius Vance, one of the most powerful men in the galaxy, had chosen her for reasons she hadn't even considered. It wasn't about her lack of qualifications, it was about something deeper, something the others couldn't see or understand. The room fell into an uneasy silence. The other candidates, though still brimming with disbelief, knew better than to question Darius Vance further. He turned back to Sava, a small but genuine smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "I see potential in you, Sava. This journey is going to be difficult, and there will be many challenges ahead. But I believe you have the strength to face them." Sava's heart swelled with a mixture of emotions, gratitude, disbelief, and a flicker of pride she hadn't felt in a long time. This was real. She had been chosen, not despite her struggles, but because of them. Darius turned to the rest of the candidates. "For the rest of you, this is not the end. Keep striving for excellence. There will be other opportunities. The future is vast, and we are only at the beginning. With that, he dismissed the group, and the candidates slowly began to file out of the hall, their whispers still trailing behind them. Some cast envious glances at Sava, while others ignored her entirely, their disappointment too fresh. As Sava stood there, still trying to absorb what had just happened, one of the robotic aides approached her and handed her a sleek silver datapad. "This will provide you with all the information you need to prepare for your journey," the aide said in a flat, mechanical voice. "The ship departs in 3 days." Sava stared at the datapad, her mind still reeling. In 3 days, she would leave Veltrex. In 3 days, she would step aboard Darius Vance's ship and start a journey she had never imagined possible. As she looked up, she saw Darius watching her again, his expression thoughtful. "See you on the ship, Sava," he said before turning and walking away, his entourage following him out of the hall. For the first time in a long time, Sava allowed herself to hope. She had been chosen. Not by luck, not by chance, but by something deeper, something that made her more than just a poor alien girl covered in mud. And now, her journey was about to begin. 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Sava could hardly believe the whirlwind of events that had led her to this moment. As she stood on the platform, staring up at the massive, sleek ship that would carry her away from Veltrex, the reality of her new life started to sink in. The ship, a gleaming vessel of cutting-edge technology, loomed before her like a metallic beast. Its silver surface reflected the twin suns of Veltrex, casting long shadows on the ground beneath her. Sava's family had come to say goodbye, though the moment was bittersweet. Her mother, Tyra, tried to hide her tears, her strong, withered hands gripping Sava's shoulders tightly as they shared a final embrace. "I'm so proud of you," Tyra whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're going to do great things, Sava. Things we could only dream of." Sava smiled, though her heart ached. "I'll make sure I don't forget where I come from, no matter where I go." Her father, Elner, nodded silently, standing beside them. He had been quieter than usual since Sava had been chosen, a mix of pride and sadness on his face. He pulled her into a brief, firm hug before stepping back, his voice hoarse. "You've always been strong. Stronger than you know. Now go show them what a Veltraxian is made of." With that, Sava stepped back, blinking away the tears. This was it. There was no turning back now. The ship's engines hummed, a low, vibrating sound that filled the air, reminding her that her future was just beyond those polished doors. The human overseers and robotic aides stood by, guiding other selected candidates from different parts of Veltrex onto the ship, their faces filled with awe and nervous excitement. Sava had expected some resentment from the other candidates, but most of them had left days earlier, once Darius had made his choice. She was the only one from her district, the only one from the mud-soaked outskirts, the only one who had been chosen. The massive doors of the ship slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the gleaming interior. A human attendant greeted her with a nod, holding a datapad as he scanned her credentials. "Sava from Veltrex, correct?" he asked, his tone formal. She nodded, her voice catching in her throat. "Yes. Welcome aboard. Your quarters have been prepared for you. If you'll follow me, we'll get you settled in before departure." His voice was polite but impersonal, as though she were just another file on his datapad. Still, Sava followed him inside, her nerves tingling with every step. The interior of the ship was unlike anything she had ever seen. Sleek corridors with softly glowing lights, smooth walls that seemed to pulse with energy, and windows that revealed the vast expanse of space beyond. The floor beneath her feet vibrated gently, a reminder of the advanced engines powering the vessel. The attendant led her down a series of corridors, past rooms filled with high-tech equipment and other crew members moving with purpose. Eventually, they arrived at a small but comfortable cabin, the door sliding open to reveal her new quarters. Inside, the room was pristine. A single bed, a small desk with a holographic interface, and a window that looked out into the endless void of space. It was more luxurious than anything Sava had ever known. She stepped inside, feeling out of place in the clean, futuristic surroundings. Her dirty, worn clothes and the traces of mud still clinging to her skin felt even more obvious now. "I'll leave you to get settled. The captain will brief you on our schedule shortly. If you need anything, use the communication console." The attendant nodded and left her alone in the room, the door closing with a soft hiss behind him. Sava stood in the center of the room for a moment, taking it all in. The hum of the ship's engines was a constant reminder of how far she had come from her home in the muddy outskirts of Veltrax. She had never imagined she would be here, standing on a human ship, about to leave her planet behind. But she wasn't just leaving Veltrax. She was leaving behind the life she had always known, the struggle, the poverty, the mud, and stepping into a new world where everything was uncertain. Later that day, after a brief tour of the ship, Sava was called to meet with Darius Vance in the command deck. Her heart raced as she made her way through the ship's corridors, feeling the weight of every step. This was the first time she would see him since the selection. The command deck was an impressive sight. Large, curved windows surrounded the area, offering a panoramic view of space. The stars glittered like distant diamonds, and in the distance, Sava could see the outline of Veltrax, growing smaller as they prepared to jump into hyperspace. Darius stood at the center of the room, studying a holographic map of their course. His posture was relaxed, but there was a sharpness in his eyes, a sense that he was always thinking, always calculating. When Sava entered, he turned, offering her a brief smile. "Sava," he said, his voice calm but warm. "Welcome aboard. I trust you've settled into your quarters?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, her voice steady despite the nervousness swirling inside her. "Good." He gestured for her to join him at the map. "We'll be making a series of jumps through hyperspace over the next few days. Our destination is a station on the edge of the Helix Nebula, where the Galaxy Expansion Initiative's central hub is located. Once we arrive, your real training will begin." Sava nodded, her mind spinning with the possibilities. "What kind of training?" she asked, unable to hide her curiosity. Darius's smile widened slightly, as though he had been expecting the question. "You'll be trained in everything from advanced technology and diplomacy to combat and leadership. The Galaxy Expansion Initiative is about more than just exploration. We're building something new, something that will change the way the galaxy operates. And we need people who are capable of adapting to whatever challenges arise." Sava swallowed hard. "I don't have the education the others have. I'm not like them." Darius tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing in thought. "That's exactly why I chose you, Sava. The others were polished, yes, but they lacked the grit, the resilience that comes from facing real adversity. You've survived things they've never had to imagine. And that's a strength you'll need out there." His words hit her like a shockwave. For so long, she had seen her struggle as a weakness, a burden that held her back. But here was Darius Vance, telling her that her hardships made her stronger. "We're about to make the jump into hyperspace," Darius said, turning back to the map. "Once we're in, there's no turning back. Are you ready?" Sava looked out at the stars, at the shrinking silhouette of Veltrax far behind them. Her family, her home, the mud and grime that had clung to her skin for as long as she could remember it was all fading away. "I'm ready," she said, her voice filled with a quiet determination. Darius nodded, pleased. "Then let's begin." With a press of a button, the ship's engines roared to life, and the stars outside stretched into lines of light as they leaped into hyperspace. Sava stood beside Darius, watching as the familiar galaxy faded away into the unknown. This was it. Her new life had begun. As the ship hurtled through the stars, Sava couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope inside her. She had been chosen. She had survived. And now, she was on the path to something greater, something that would change not just her future, but the future of her entire planet. The poor alien girl covered in mud was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone ready to face whatever lay ahead. And as the stars blurred past, Sava knew one thing for certain. She would not fail.